scale.
The photographs of him are at odds with the epic nature of what he did. He doesn't exactly look like a mountaineer, and you get the sneaky suspicion that this hat is being worn without a trace of irony. And yet occasionally we get glimpses of a man as tough as old climbing boots. Just listen to this. Heavy walking all day in soft snow. They had to scrape me down with a knife to get the frozen snow off before I could enter the house.
Munro's great journey would test every fibre of his resilience. He had left the library shelves far below. Munro's odyssey might have begun as a scientific endeavour, but exploring these mountains would be sheer, visceral adventure.
Tackling so many summits would take him the length and the breadth of the Highlands. Here was the chance to become an explorer in his own land.
But he was not alone. Deep in the mountains, somebody was following his footsteps. Someone else had heard the call of the list.
This is the Scottish Mountaineering Club hut beneath the north face of Ben Nevis. It's quite a long time since I've been in here. It's got a wonderful atmosphere. This table has a long history. It was made by the Reverend Archie Robertson. His carpentry is as robust as his reputation. He was one of the most indefatigable, charismatic figures in the world of Victorian mountaineering. It was on the tops high above this hut that the Reverend Robertson was struck by lightning and catapulted 1,000 feet down a gully. He picked himself up and walked down to the valley bottom. He claimed later not to have remembered much of the incident, but he did leave a few lines about it. Left Imperial Hotel, Fort William, at 9:05 for Ben Nevis via Parth. Struck by lightning about 1 on ridge of Corrie overlooking Glen Nevis. Got home at 4:15. Dr. MacArthur dressed my head for 2 hours, 20 stitches. Temperature about 1 degree above normal at 10 p.m.
Like Munro, Reverend Robertson was tough, and like Munro, he was a member of the privileged classes. But although they knew each other, their paths seldom crossed, and their outlook on who should be allowed onto the hills was, well, different.
Munro climbed many of his hills with one of these, a heavy candle lamp. The reason? Well, believe it or not, he often climbed at night. Why on earth, you might ask, was he doing that? Well, Munro was a dyed-in-the-wool member of the gentry. He believed that landowners had the right to prevent ordinary people from going on their land. Munro didn't want to upset those landowners. His solution was to climb at night to avoid bumping into the laird's gamekeepers.
Reverend Robertson, on the other hand, was a defender of the right of ordinary people to climb wherever they chose. His passion for the mountains had begun the year before Munro's list was published. But once the list had gone public, the Reverend's hill climbing turned from enthusiastic to unstoppable. Whilst Munro was out to correct the fine detail of his list, Reverend Robertson had his eye on the bigger picture. Here was the first ever compendium of Scotland's high mountains. The Reverend soon found himself having climbed enough of Munro's peaks for a new ambition to take shape: the possibility of bagging them all. And along with that came the possibility of him being first.
The Reverend doesn't give much away in his writing, but being first to climb all of Scotland's 3,000-foot mountains must have seemed an irresistible temptation. But he had a huge challenge on his hands. The Reverend might have been lightning-proof, but Munro had a head start, and he had some serious catching up to do.
But the minister was a clever man. In the technicalities of Munro's list, he saw a tempting and radical possibility. A legitimate shortcut, if you like. A way to catch, even perhaps overtake, Munro himself. So how did the Reverend go about it? Ironically, the foundations of the minister's shortcut lay in the meticulous way that Munro had presented his list. And to understand it for myself, I've met up with extreme mountaineer Alan Hinks. Alan was the first Brit to climb all 14 of the world's 8,000-metre peaks, the highest in the world. That was Alan's list, but he harbours ambitions to bag Munro's list as well.
What part did the Scottish mountains play in training you as a world-class mountaineer?
Well, they did, for sure. I mean, coming here and going out in this gnarly weather, and often it's dark and you're in a blizzard. I mean, it is tough, the Scottish hills, and you have got to be prepared to suffer to go out in the Scottish hills quite often, I must say. Sounds like a masochist, doesn't it? I mean, it's a nice suffering, and this is where I like to be, really, even in the rain, honest.
It's about 2 degrees minus and pouring rain. You just said you like to be here.
I do, it is great. I mean, it's another hard day in the office.
It's not great weather for me, is it, Al? What do you reckon? Should we go on or not?
I think we should bash on. I mean, is it... Yeah, it's Scottish weather. We've just got to crack on.
You're the leader. Off we go.
We're climbing what was for Munro one of the very finest of all Scottish mountains, Bideoin nam Beinn in Glencoe. Its name in Gaelic means peak of the mountains, a high peak surrounded by other lower summits. Its complex structure illustrates perfectly a loophole in Munro's list that allowed Reverend Robertson's peak bagging to surge forward. The crucial point is what we mean by climbing a mountain. You have to get to the top, of course, the very highest point. But surrounding it are very often ridges with their own lower summits. These are satellite peaks. The question is this: to claim the mountain, do you have to climb just the main summit or the neighbouring satellite peaks as well? For the nitpicking Munro, there was only one possible answer. He had to climb every main summit and every satellite peak.
If we look at Munro's lists, Munro's divided his 3,000-foot mountains into an A list and a B list. The A list are over here in this column. They've all been given a number. You can see that Bideoin nam Beinn, which is where we are now, is here. So it's a main summit.
24.
24. That's the 24th highest mountain in Scotland. There's Bideoin up there somewhere, and we're down underneath it. But you can see Bideoin nam Beinn has two other names beneath it, Stob Corrie nam Bay and Stob Corrie and Lochan.
Bideoin nam Beinn isn't just one summit. Somewhere up there in the mist are two lower satellite peaks as well.
Now those are B-list summits. Those two are part of the same mountain, but Munro treats them as lower satellite peaks. The big question is whether, if you're going to climb Bideoin nam Beinn, you have to climb all three of those peaks, the main one and the two satellite peaks, or whether you can just go to Bideoin nam Beinn.
Just to Bideoin nam Beinn, especially today. You go to the top of Everest, or you go to the top of Annapurna, or you go to the top of K2 or Kanchenjunga, and you go to the top. You don't think, ooh, I better do all them little peaks around as well. Otherwise, life isn't long enough.